Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, where we discuss everything in the world of fantasy football. As always, I'm your host, Jeremiah, and we just got some breaking news that honestly, in the past about 5 to 10 minutes, Eddie Lacy is going to Seattle. The Seahawks and Eddie Lacy have agreed to a 1-year, $3 million deal, but the deal can be worth up to $5.5 at the end of 2017. So it's an incentive-laden deal, but I think this is a really good signing by the Seahawks. The Seahawks, one of their biggest weaknesses was the running game. And I do think with the injuries of Thomas Ross, CJ Prosise, that was a big hole for that offense. And Russell Wilson just had to constantly lead the offense. Even though he was good at it, he just had to be the man. But I do think with Eddie Lacy going to the Seattle Seahawks, I do think it makes him an RB1 right now. I really do. I still think Eddie Lacy's young enough to be effective. He's only going, I think he's about to be, he's 27 years old. He didn't miss 5 games last season to an ankle injury, so he only played in 5 games. And he had trouble staying on the field that year, but before that, he's played at least in 15 games from 2013 to 15. And he's been, even though 2015 was probably his worst year, he was effective when he was in shape. So I do think if Eddie Lacy is in shape, if the Seahawks don't get the fat Eddie Lacy, this is a really good signing. And I think it could potentially make Eddie Lacy an RB1. But as far as his draft value because of this, I do think there's a chance that he won't get a lot of carries because of Thomas Ross and CJ Prosise. So he's not going to be the third down back, but the reason why I think he can be an RB1 is because of the effect that he can score touchdowns. And as of right now, my RB1 ranking could change. He can be an RB2 by August. I just want to know how the Seahawks can use Lacy with the other running backs on the roster. But I did like CJ Prosise last season. He was great in the passing game. He did run when he needed to. He should be coming back healthy. Thomas Ross should be coming back healthy, but he did have trouble with injuries last season. So I like the signing from Eddie Lacy and the Seahawks. Lacy has still a lot to prove. And, conditioning injuries have become an issue for him towards the end of his tenure with Green Bay. I did not expect Green Bay to re-sign Eddie Lacy because, of the conditioning issues that he's dealt with. He had his worst year in 2015. And I think the Seahawks love pounding the ball. They're going to use him effectively. They're going to utilize Lacy effectively. And, with Lacy, Thomas Rawls, and CJ Prosise, I think with how they're going to – I think Prosise is a perfect PPR running back. I think Rawls has a chance to be RB2. So I think with the addition of Lacy, I think he has a chance to be RB1. But if the Seahawks splits Lacy and Thomas Rawls, then I think they can be a very strong high-end RB2s by, they have that kind of potential. Because we've seen what Thomas Rawls has done. He can be an effective running back. It's just on the fact of staying healthy. But, I do like the signing from Seattle. I really do. And I do think it has a whole nother addition. Remember, Seattle was one of the teams that hosted Adrian Peterson. He came there for a visit, and I do think they went with someone that was younger, that could be more effective. And if Adrian Peterson would have went to the Seattle Seahawks, I think it would have been good. But I do think with the fact that Eddie Lacy is younger, and he kind of fits the Seattle scheme quite a little bit more, because Lacy doesn't have to be the guy. I think AP wanted to be the guy, but overall, from a fantasy perspective, I do think this was a great signing for the Seahawks, and I think it's going to be interesting ranking Eddie Lacy moving forward. I think he's someone that's going to be drafted in the second or third round. He may be a little bit overdrafted. But when you're on a team that's contending and that loves pounding the ball, I do think that's the reason why he would be in the second or third rounds. Okay, well, moving on from Eddie Lacy, one of the biggest offseason trades this year was Brandin Cooks going to New England for the number 32 pick. And Brandin Cooks going to New England to play along with Tom Brady, Rob Gronkowski. Brandin Cooks he has potential to be a top 10, top 15 receiver because number 12 is going to throw him the football. Brandin Cooks is the best receiver New England has had since Randy Moss. And, I think with the crowded receiving core in New Orleans kind of played a part in it. It kind of made Brandin Cooks more expandable, but he's been really good with Drew Brees. So he goes from Drew Brees, a Hall of Fame quarterback, to practically the best quarterback to play the game in Tom Brady. And so when you look at his stats, so in 2014, he kind of was just emerging on the scene. But when 2015 and 16 came around, he was one of the top receivers in the league, but he wasn't talked about, probably because Drew Brees was his quarterback. So I do think that Brandin Cooks going to New England, it's going to boost his fantasy value so much. So much. I think Brandin Cooks is going to be someone that's going to probably drafted in early second round. I don't think he's going to be in the first round. He's just not that type of guy, but I do think he's going to be drafted in the second round. He won't make it into the third round in some drafts, but I do think the effect of Tom Brady there is going to boost so much for Mr. Brandin Cooks there. But when you look at his numbers, he's had at least 70 receptions past 2 seasons. He's had at least 1,100 yards receiving. He's had at least 8 touchdowns. So that's really good consistency there. And I think with the speed that Brandin Cooks has to go along with Julian Edelman to take the underneath routes, and with Rob Gronkowski taking some of those underneath routes, Brandin Cooks is going to do so well in this offense. And you have to put him as a receiver 1. And it's crazy how one trade can boost a fantasy player's value. And I think we're going to get that with Brandin Cooks. I think he's going to be really effective. I do think that he's going to be someone that's going to be he has potential to be a top 10, top 15 receiver at the end of the year. And I'm only saying that because Tom Brady is the quarterback. He's still playing at a high level. So if Tom Brady ends up not even, let's just say Tom Brady is not as effective and he has an injury, I still think with Jimmy Garoppolo still there, Brandin Cooks is going to be effective. And I do think I love Brandin Cooks now even more with him going to the Patriots. So I think he's someone that's going to be a lot of fantasy radars. He's going to be, I just can't put him in the first round. There's just way too many talented players there that you can take. I do think he can be a mid-second round. I think maybe early second can be a little bit of a reach unless you really want a receiver. But that's my value as of right now. So, it can change as the season goes on. But I do like Brandin Cooks even more now since he's in the Patriots, and I hope I draft him on my team. So we'll see how that goes. All right, well, I'm going to take my first break, and when I get back, I'm going to discuss some more of the fantasy kind of irrelevant deals that have occurred over the past week. I'm going to actually talk about Dwayne Allen going to the Patriots. His fantasy value has boosted so much, as well as Jack Doyle. And I'm going to talk about some other receivers like Terrelle Pryor, Pierre Garcon, Desean Jackson, Alshon Jeffrey, Torrey Smith. I'm going to talk about all those guys today, but I'm probably going to talk about Dwayne Allen and Terrelle Pryor when I get back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And one of the most underrated trades from the past week was Dwayne Allen going to the Patriots from the Colts. It's a different era when the Patriots and Colts make deals like this. This would never happen during Peyton Manning's heyday. I swear, it would never happen at all, but we can tell it's a new era for both of these squads. But, Jack Doyle, who was the backup tight end this past season, he signed a 3-year, $19 million contract last Tuesday. And it kind of led to the Colts trading Allen on Wednesday for a 4th-round pick. And Dwayne Allen, who is going to be the number 2 guy behind Rob Gronkowski. So the reason, or I should say the reason, but with if Gronkowski stays healthy, I don't know if Dwayne Allen would have much fantasy value. He's not Martellus Bennett. And I do think that he is a strong number 2 tight end. But if Gronkowski misses time, Dwayne Allen has potential to be a top tight end in fantasy. But with Rob Gronkowski, you never know. I just think you have to be prepared with him. But let's just say Rob Gronkowski does stay healthy and on the field. I think Dwayne Allen fantasy value is pretty much not going to be as high. But with Jack Doyle now set to be the lead guy, set to be the starting tight end for the Colts, I think he's going to be a sleeper. And I think with Andrew Luck throwing him the football now, I like Jack Doyle heading to fantasy drafts. I think he has potential to be a breakout candidate. He's one of my top sleeper picks now. And with he had his best year in 2016. He had 59 catches, 584 yards, and 5 touchdowns, and he had 75 targets. He ended up being the number 12 fantasy tight end in standard leagues. And, he played well. He played better, honestly, when Dwayne Allen was out. And I think with Jack Doyle starting full-time, I think his numbers are going to rise. And, Andrew Luck loves relying on his tight ends, especially in the red zone. So, last season, 12 of Andrew Luck's 31 touchdowns went to his tight ends. And that was the same in 2014 when he missed a lot of time. He was only limited to 7 games. But during that year, he threw 18 of his 40 touchdowns to tight ends. So, I think Doyle might have a chance to get some double-digit tight end touchdowns for fantasy owners. So, I think he's someone you have to target. He's going to give you a lot of value. He's definitely a sleeper that you guys need to keep your eye on. I'm high on Jack Doyle right now, and you guys need to keep your eye on him. He is one of my top sleepers heading into 2017. All right, well, a receiver that was a popular waiver wire pickup last season was Terrelle Pryor. He ended up being one of the top receivers in fantasy, being really productive. So he signed to Washington, and he looks like he's very uncertain. There's a very uncertainty at the quarterback position there in Washington. We don't know if Kirk Cousins is going to get traded or not. We just don't know. But Terrelle Pryor, it doesn't matter to him. He played with like 6 quarterbacks last season. So I think with Terrelle Pryor, his fantasy value, it's not going to take a hit. I still think he has a chance to be a top 20 receiver in fantasy. He's going to be a top receiver, definitely on that squad. I do like Jamison Crowder for the Redskins this year. I think his fantasy value is going to rise so high with, Desean Jackson and Pierre Garcon not going to be there. But Terrelle Pryor, him going to Washington, I like him going there because Kirk Cousins is the quarterback. He does have a lot of success the past 2 years. But, this is probably the best quarterback he's going to play with. Regardless if Kirk Cousins is there or not, Terrelle Pryor just knows how to play. We've seen him playing with the Browns. You know how that went. But, with Terrelle Pryor playing with Robert Griffin III, Cody Kessler, Josh McCown, Kevin Hogan, Charlie Whitehurst, he was still productive. And him going to Washington, I do like that deal. That was a deal that they need to get done. It's a 1-year contract for $8 million. And he said he likes to play with Kurt. And I do think if Kirk Cousins does stay with Washington in 2017, I think Terrelle Pryor has a chance to be a top 15, top 20 receiver. I think I might like him a little bit better than Jamison Crowder. He has a chance to be a really good receiver. I'm really glad that he made the transition to receiver last season. But when I was watching him last season with the Browns, he was obviously the best player, which is a shame because Terrelle Pryor has only been a receiver for 1 season. But maybe that's because, Corey Coleman was hurt a lot. Josh Gordon hasn't played in like 2 years. But, Terrelle Pryor going to Washington, it really does, it boosts his value. And I do think you have to kind of keep your eye on if Kirk Cousins is there or not. Because right now I expect Terrelle Pryor to be a receiver 2 with receiver 1 upside. But if Kirk Cousins does leave and Colt McCoy's a starter, you have to kind of drop him down to receiver 3 with receiver 2 upside. So Kirk Cousins is going to affect Terrelle Pryor's fantasy value a lot, but I think no matter who is the quarterback, he's going to be productive. It's just, is he going to be consistent? He's going to have consistent numbers. And remember, he has Jamison Crowder there to play alongside with. I can't even talk today. Terrelle Pryor does have Jamison Crowder to play alongside with him, and he does have Jordan Reed. So maybe those guys are going to take targets away from him. But, I do think it does open up the potential production of Pryor as well. Because remember, Crowder is going to get a lot of targets from Cousins. Jordan Reed is going to get a lot of targets. So that may open up the door for Terrelle Pryor if teams start to double-team Jordan Reed, if they start to double-team one of the other. So there's a lot of potential here in Terrelle Pryor, and I do like it. I do think he is a strong mid-round fantasy receiver, and I think he has a lot of potential to be top 15, top 20. So we're going to have to see what happens with Kirk Cousins because that's going to impact Terrelle Pryor's fantasy value. And I'm going to take my last and final break. And when I get back, I'm going to discuss Pierre Garcon, Desean Jackson, Alshon Jeffrey, and Torrey Smith when I get back to the Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And I discussed Terrelle Pryor going to Washington in the previous segment. But as for the receivers that played there last year, Pierre Garcon and Desean Jackson, they have gone to other teams, and it's going to impact their value as well. Well, Pierre Garcon, he signed a 5-year deal with the San Francisco 49ers. It is $20 million guaranteed and a $12 million signing bonus. So, over 5 years, there's $20 million guaranteed in that. But he was very productive for Kirk Cousins and Washington last season. He had one of his best years since 2013. He had 79 receptions, 1,041 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And remember, he was part of a 3-headed group of Desean Jackson and Jamison Crowder. So Pierre Garcon, with him going to the 49ers, it does hinder his value a little bit because, we don't know the quarterback situation there. It looks like Brian Hoyer is set to be the starter heading to the season. But Brian Hoyer has shown that he's been a productive quarterback at times. So there's a chance that Pierre Garcon has a top 20. He has top 20 potential to be in fantasy. Yeah. Because he is the best, and he is going to be he is going to be the leading receiver there because he's the best on that depth chart. You got to look at what the 49ers have at receiver, and Pierre Garcon is the best receiver on that squad as of right now. I think they might make some moves to improve that receiving core in the draft, maybe in free agency. Remember, they did get Marquise Goodwin as well, so he can be an impact player, but I do think right now, Pierre Garcon, I think he has top 20 potential in fantasy. I really do think so. But as for Desean Jackson, he goes to Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I think it's I don't know the terms of the deal on top of my head, but he was widely productive for Washington as well. He's going to pair with Mike Evans. I like the pair of Desean Jackson and Mike Evans. I do like that as well. And Desean Jackson, he's going to be the speed threat there. I do think he's going to be a receiver 2, receiver 1, because I do think Mike Evans is going to be the lead guy there. But man, I love this Tampa Bay offense. This is going to be exciting to watch next season. And Desean Jackson, he finished very strong. He had 4 100-yard performances in his last 6 games. And in that time, he averaged 24.4 yards on 22 receptions with 2 touchdowns. And he did have 1,000 yards. He had 1,005 to be exact, and he caught 56. He had 56 catches. So Kirk Cousins is going to lose a lot of value because of these 2 guys, but I still think he's productive enough to be a top 15 quarterback. But as of now, Desean Jackson, he makes Jameis Winston better. I think Jameis Winston is going to be a sleeper this year. I think he has a chance to be a top 10 quarterback in fantasy. Pierre Garcon, I think he has a chance to be a sleeper as well. I think he has potential to be a top 20 receiver in fantasy as well. And with these 2 guys leaving, it is the first time that a pair of teammates who had 1,000 yards receiving each have left the team the next season. So there's a lot of production that's going to be lost in Washington. But I do think with Jamison Crowder still there, Jordan Reed still there, I think Kirk Cousins will be fine. And I do like Jamison Crowder even more now. But I do think there's a lot to be liked with Desean Jackson in Tampa Bay. And the Alshon Jeffrey, who was one of the top free agents this year, he signed a 1-year deal worth $14 million to Philadelphia Eagles. And Philly also signed Torrey Smith to a 3-year contract as well. So I do like these moves that Philly has made because, man, they needed a receiver. I like Torrey Smith even more now. He's playing with Carson Wentz, and he's playing with probably one of the best possession receivers and Alshon Jeffrey. But Alshon Jeffrey, he can run a little bit. People forget about that. Yeah, he's big, but he can run a little bit. Alshon Jeffrey has had trouble with injuries the past few years. Last season, unfortunately, he was suspended for the last 40 games. He's going to add a whole lot to this Eagles offense. He's going to add a lot for Carson Wentz. I think Carson Wentz has a chance to be a sleeper as well at the quarterback position. So Alshon Jeffrey, he's no doubt a receiver 1. He's probably going to be an early 2nd-round pick. Torrey Smith, I could see him being really good value. I think he's a strong receiver 2. He's going to add a lot for Carson Wentz. And I did say that Torrey Smith was a one-trick pony, but I think with Alshon Jeffrey there right next to him, that's going to add a lot of production to Torrey Smith's stats. Because when you look at his 2 years in San Francisco, it was a struggle. He didn't really do a whole lot for that team. Maybe it's because of the quarterbacks that they had. But he didn't do a whole lot for that team at all. In Baltimore, his last season in Baltimore, he had 11 touchdowns. So that was a very good production that Torrey Smith had in Baltimore. But moving on to Philly, I like the moves that they made. I think Alshon Jeffrey and Torrey Smith are going to add a lot of elements to this offense. I think Carson Wentz is going to be a sleeper. I did say Jameis Winston was going to be a sleeper at the quarterback position, but Carson Wentz, I do think he's someone that's going to be monitored in the middle rounds of fantasy. But Torrey Smith, I do like him as a strong receiver 3 with receiver 2 upside. I like him a whole lot better than he was in San Francisco. If he was in San Francisco, I think he was going to go undrafted because there's really no quarterbacks there. But with Alshon Jeffrey going to Philly, I do think he has a chance to be a top 10 receiver in fantasy again. And I like the moves that Philly made. And it's going to be an interesting year to watch the NFC East because remember, the New York Giants signed Brandon Marshall to go along with Odell Beckham Jr. The Cowboys, they signed Terrence Williams to a 4-year extension to go alongside Des Bryant, and they got Cole Beasley there, so that's a really good receiver core. And, Washington, they tried to make moves with getting Terrelle Pryor, but, that organization has been in turmoil. So there's a lot to be liked about this division, and I do think it's going to be exciting to watch in 2017. But now that's going to conclude my show. I hate to leave, but I gotta go, guys. Yeah. But I actually won't be back for this show on Friday. Anthony is going to host the show alone. But, of course, I will be back the following week to host the Fantasy Football Podcast. So, I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in. And you guys can catch the show on a variety of platforms. That is Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, and on the website gsmcpodcast.com. You can also follow the show on a variety of social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Twitter and Instagram, the handle is at @GSMC_football. And Facebook, you can like us at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Jeremiah. I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in to the podcast. And you guys have a great day and have a pleasant tomorrow.